The rain had been falling steadily for hours, each droplet tapping a relentless rhythm against the tin roof of the old diner. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of coffee and fried eggs, but the atmosphere was suddenly silent, an oppressive, heavy silence that seemed to swallow the usual hum of conversation and laughter. Every seat was emptying, the waitresses slipping away one by one like shadows dissolving into the night, leaving behind only the faint echo of footsteps and the distant, rhythmic drip of rain. It was as if a storm had swept through, not just outside but inside as well, an invisible tempest that tore through the warmth of the place, leaving behind a ghost town of abandoned tables and broken routines. The flickering neon sign outside cast a pale glow, trembling with the wind, illuminating the empty chairs like ghosts waiting to be filled again. The silence was so profound that even the smallest heartbeat seemed to thump loudly, echoing through the hollow space, punctuated only by the occasional tear of a rainstorm. In the corner, a young woman sat motionless, her hands trembling slightly on the counter. Her eyes, dark and distant, reflected a storm of emotions, confusion, exhaustion, a flicker of hope buried deep beneath layers of despair. She was the daughter of the Japanese CEO, a girl accustomed to luxury and control, yet tonight, she felt unmoored, adrift in a sea of silence and rain, her world unraveling like the threads of her own identity. The weight of expectations pressed down on her shoulders, heavy as the clouds above, threatening to drown her in a storm she couldn't see the end of. But amidst the emptiness and the rain, a single figure moved, a waitress, her steps quiet but purposeful. She paused, her eyes briefly meeting the girl's, a flicker of understanding passing between them like a whisper carried by the wind. Without a word, she offered a gentle smile, a fragile bridge over the chasm of silence. In that moment, the storm inside the girl's heart softened just a little, the tears threatening to spill over held back by a fragile hope, an unspoken promise that maybe, just maybe, change was on the horizon. The rain continued its relentless dance on the roof, but inside, something shifted, an ember of resilience flickering to life, waiting to ignite. And as the night stretched on, the girl realized that sometimes, the storm outside mirrors the one within, and in that chaos, there's a quiet, undeniable possibility for something new to bloom. The question was, would she let it? Would she find the courage to face the rain and the silence, and perhaps, find her own way through it? The night was still young, and the story was just beginning. Her name was Hannah, though she rarely used it anymore. The weight of her silence was heavier than words could carry. She sat alone in the corner of the diner, clutching a chipped mug of lukewarm tea, her fingers trembling slightly as if the cold inside her was spilling outward. She wasn't crying, at least, not openly, but her eyes betrayed her, glassy and distant, reflecting a storm she had long tried to bury beneath layers of composure. Every morning she woke up feeling like a ghost haunting her own life, memories pressing down on her like a suffocating fog. Hannah's world had fractured the day her father's company collapsed, the empire built on silent sacrifices and unspoken burdens crumbling into dust. The lavish dinners, the endless expectations, those had been her armor, hiding her vulnerability from the world. But behind the polished veneer was a girl who had learned to hide her grief behind a mask of indifference. She was only 17, yet her shoulders carried the weight of someone twice her age. Her eyes carried the stories of loneliness, of nights spent staring at the ceiling, whispering to the shadows that knew her pain better than anyone else ever could. She remembered the day she lost her father's approval, the day her world shifted. The quiet disappointment in his eyes when she failed to meet his impossible standards. The way her heart clenched at the thought of being a disappointment, a burden she could never escape. It was as if her wounds had been etched into her soul, invisible scars that no one saw, yet every day she felt their ache anew. Her grief was a silent scream, echoing in the emptiness of her room, in the hollow spaces between her dreams and reality. And yet, despite the ache, Hannah kept going, not because she was brave, but because she had no choice. The girl she once was had faded into the background, replaced by this fragile shell, desperately clinging to what little stability remained. She often wondered if anyone truly saw her, if anyone could understand the loneliness that lurked behind her quiet gaze. She felt like a leaf caught in a relentless wind, drifting aimlessly, afraid to fall but unable to hold on much longer. Tonight, as the rain persisted outside, Hannah's fragile heart felt the cold seep in deeper. The diner's warmth, which once seemed comforting, now felt distant, like a memory from a different life. She stared into her tea, her reflection flickering in the dark liquid, a ghost staring back. The ache inside her was a quiet, constant companion, whispering of hope and despair in equal measure. And then, as if summoned by her silent tears, a soft presence entered her view, a waitress, unnoticed by most, with gentle eyes that held no judgment, only understanding. Hannah looked up, hesitant, her walls trembling but not yet broken. She wondered if anyone could see her pain, if anyone could truly reach her through the fog of her grief. The night stretched long and silent, but in that quiet moment, there was a faint glimmer, an unspoken invitation to remember that she was still here, still fighting, still longing for a sliver of light in the darkness. And maybe, just maybe, that light was waiting for her to reach out. The rain had eased into a gentle drizzle by the time the door of the diner creaked open. A faint, uneven clatter of shoes on the wet pavement announced the new arrival, an outsider, unremarkable in appearance but carrying an air of quiet persistence. He was a young man, maybe in his early 20s, with worn sneakers, a faded hoodie, and a backpack that sagged heavy on one shoulder. His face was streaked with streaks of dirt and the faint shadow of a day's labor, yet his eyes held a softness, an unspoken kindness that didn't demand attention but subtly beckoned it. He hesitated at the threshold, hesitant to disturb the quiet stillness inside, then slowly stepped in, his gaze flickering over the empty tables and the solitary figure sitting near the window. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled paper bag from his backpack and set it gently on the counter, a simple act that seemed almost accidental. Inside, there was a small sandwich, wrapped in plastic, and a paper cup filled with water. Nothing elaborate, just a humble gesture from a person who understood what it was to be unnoticed, to be forgotten in the rush of the world. His eyes lingered on Hannah for a moment, a flicker of recognition passing through them, though he kept his expression neutral, almost shy. He moved quietly to a seat nearby, choosing the one closest to her, but not intrusively so. As he settled in, he fished out a crumpled notebook from his bag and began to sketch, simple, rough lines of what looked like a cityscape, perhaps memories from a place he'd visited or dreamed of visiting. His hands were unsteady, the lines imperfect, but there was a gentle focus in his gaze, an earnest attempt to create something beautiful out of the chaos. He rarely glanced up, yet every so often, his eyes drifted toward Hannah, as if sensing her unspoken pain but respecting her space. He wasn't trying to fix her, nor was he overly attentive. There was no grand speech, no dramatic gesture, just a quiet presence that seemed to say, "I see you." In the way he moved, in the way he kept his distance but never ignored her, there was a subtle acknowledgement of her existence, fragile as it was. Hannah noticed him. How could she not? But she kept her gaze fixed on her tea, her heart guarded behind layers of silence. Still, she felt the faint weight of his gaze, like a gentle wind brushing against her, stirring something she'd long buried. She wondered if he noticed her trembling, or if he simply saw a girl lost in her own storm, as he was lost in his own quiet struggles. The rain resumed softly outside, each drop tapping in rhythm with her heartbeat, but inside the diner, a small act of kindness had quietly taken root. The boy's gesture, so simple, so understated, held 1,000 unspoken stories. It was a reminder that even in the depths of loneliness, unnoticed acts of kindness could softly crack the armor of despair, offering a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible after all. And as Hannah hesitated, her eyes flickering toward him, she began to wonder if this quiet stranger might be a gentle mirror of her own hidden resilience. Not a savior, but a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts can shift the world just enough to make you believe in the possibility of something better. The night stretched on, quiet and full of unspoken promises, an invitation for her to listen, to look, and perhaps to find her way back to herself. The next morning, Hannah found herself glancing toward the door of the diner again, surprised to see the young man already there, seated at the same table as yesterday, his sketchbook open but untouched, lost in thought. He looked up as she hesitated near the counter, offering a small, hesitant smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Without a word, he pushed a folded paper bag across the table, this time a little more carefully, as if offering a fragile gift. Hannah hesitated, then slowly peeled back the paper to reveal a simple, homemade rice ball, warm, fragrant, and carefully wrapped in a cloth. It was a humble gesture, but in that quiet act, she felt an inexplicable warmth, a reminder that someone saw her hunger, not just for food but for kindness. She looked at him, and for a moment their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them, fragile yet profound. Over the next few days, their silent exchanges became a gentle rhythm. He would arrive early, sometimes with a small cup of tea from a nearby shop, and leave it beside her with a quiet nod. She began to notice how he always seemed to carry something, an extra umbrella on rainy days, a handful of wildflowers from the roadside, small tokens that seemed insignificant but carried an unspoken message. I see you. She learned that his name was Kenji, and that beneath his rough exterior was a heart that beat quietly with kindness, not because he wanted praise or recognition but simply because he believed everyone deserved a moment of tenderness. One rainy afternoon, as Hannah sat by the window watching droplets race down the glass, Kenji appeared at her side, holding an umbrella. Without a word, he offered it to her. She stared, hesitant, her hands trembling slightly, her defenses still thick. But then she took it, feeling the cool metal handle press into her palm. Together they stepped into the rain, walking side by side through puddles that shimmered like glass in the dim light. Hannah's coat was too thin for the storm, and as the rain soaked her, she thought of how she'd been shielding herself from so much, her grief, her fears, her loneliness. But in that moment, with Kenji quietly sharing his umbrella, she realized she didn't have to face everything alone. The rain was relentless, yet somehow softer, almost comforting, as if it too understood the weight she carried. One evening, when the sky was heavy with dark clouds and the wind whispered through the empty streets, Kenji knocked softly on her door. She opened it to find him holding a small box. Inside was a battered but still sturdy book of poetry, words that spoke of storms and resilience, of hope hiding in shadows. Without a word, he handed it to her, then stepped back, offering her a faint smile. Hannah's fingers trembled as she traced the worn cover, her heart fluttering with a strange mix of gratitude and vulnerability. In that quiet exchange, she felt a sliver of trust breaking through her armor, an acknowledgement that she was seen, that her pain mattered, that she wasn't alone in her silent struggle. Days turned into weeks, and each small gesture, the sharing of food, a walk in the rain, a book passed between trembling hands, became a thread weaving her out of isolation. Hannah's world, once so guarded and cold, began to feel a little warmer, a little less hollow. She started to look forward to these moments, even as the external conflicts gathered strength, the looming pressures, the whispers of her father's expectations, the storm of her own doubts. But in the quiet kindness of Kenji's gestures, she found a fragile hope stirring, a gentle reminder that sometimes, it's in the smallest acts, the offering of an umbrella, a shared meal, a simple book, that the greatest resilience is built. The rain outside persisted, relentless as ever, yet Hannah's heart felt the faint stirrings of something new. She wondered if she could hold on, if she could step into the storm with small acts of kindness as her shield. And in the depths of her fragile soul, she knew that these tiny moments, these quiet acts, were the first sparks of a quiet revolution within. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer walking it alone. The sky darkened suddenly, as if the world itself had been pulled into a shadow. Rumors had been creeping through the town like tendrils of smoke, whispers of the girl from the big house, the daughter of the powerful CEO, wandering the streets with a boy from nowhere, a boy who seemed to drift in and out of her life like a ghost. By the time Hannah stepped outside that evening, the whispers had turned into murmurs, then into loud voices, echoing off the cracked pavement and into the corners of every small gathering. The community's judgment was heavy, a storm that pressed down on her shoulders even before the clouds released their rain. It wasn't only gossip. It was the harsh glare of scrutiny, the unspoken rule that someone like her, an heir, a symbol of wealth and expectations, shouldn't be seen with someone like Kenji. The boy who had quietly shared his kindness, who had helped her stand a little taller each day, was suddenly seen as a threat to the fragile veneer of her world. The whispers grew louder, spilling into the streets, into the local shops, into the very air she breathed. The town's eyes seemed to burn holes into her, questioning her choices, her motives, her very existence. And with every passing hour, Hannah felt the walls closing in. Her private sanctuary of small gestures and silent understanding threatened to shatter under the weight of community condemnation. Worst of all, her father's voice echoed in her mind, cold, distant, full of disappointment. She had always known her family's world was one of strict rules and unbending standards, but now, the breach felt insurmountable. The very foundation of her identity was trembling. She could see her father's face, etched with disapproval, as he learned of her closeness to Kenji. The fear of losing everything, her inheritance, her place in the family, her future, clung to her like a shroud. She knew the rumors would soon reach the ears of her father's business associates, the media, perhaps even international eyes. The risk was not only social but personal, her reputation, her safety, her sense of belonging. The town's judgment was a powerful storm, and it had begun to swirl fiercely around her fragile world. And yet, amidst the chaos, she found herself clutching the small, worn book Kenji had given her, the poetry that spoke of resilience, of storms passing and new dawns rising. Her fingers trembled as she clutched it close, a fragile reminder that even in the fiercest winds, there was a quiet strength buried deep within. She wondered if Kenji knew what she was facing, if he could see that her act of kindness had become a battlefield, her act of defiance against a society that demanded she conform. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant thunder of gossip and the pounding of her own heart. She felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, making her question everything, her choices, her feelings, her very worth. Could she hold on to this fragile bond under such relentless external pressure? Would Kenji stand firm when the storm broke fully? Or would the weight of community judgment drown everything she had fought to build? Hannah looked toward the horizon, where the faint glow of dawn seemed distant, almost impossible to reach. The storm outside was fierce, the clouds roiled with anger and fear. But within her, a flicker of resolve ignited, a desperate hope, whispering that perhaps love, patience, and small acts of loyalty could weather even the darkest tempests. She knew the path ahead was uncertain, littered with doubts and fears, but she also knew she was no longer walking it alone. The storm might have come uninvited, but she would face it, step by step, gesture by gesture, until the skies cleared once more. And maybe, just maybe, in the quiet depths of her heart, she believed that the smallest light could pierce the darkness, guiding her toward the dawn. Kenji remained close, even as the storm of rumors and accusations raged around Hannah. He didn't speak much. Instead, he simply stayed nearby, a quiet presence that seemed to anchor her amidst the chaos. When she lingered outside the diner, staring at the darkened street, he was there, leaning against the wall, shoulders relaxed but alert. His gaze was steady, not judging but simply watching, as if to say, "I am here, and I am not leaving." He knew the weight of her silence, the way her eyes darted around as if searching for an escape route, and he understood that sometimes, words were not enough. Sometimes, the only thing to do was stand firm alongside someone, sharing the silence that carried more meaning than any empty reassurance. She had said little when she finally sat beside him on the curb, her knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the rain-slicked pavement. Yet Kenji didn't need to fill the space with words. His presence was enough, an unspoken promise that she wasn't alone, that her grief and fear were seen and acknowledged without judgment. He watched the way her fingers trembled as she clutched the small poetry book he had given her, her thumb brushing over the worn pages as a child might seek comfort from a familiar lullaby. He knew the external world was fierce, its judgments sharp and unforgiving, but he also knew it was in the quiet moments, the gentle persistence of being present, that strength was quietly cultivated. So he stayed. When Hannah finally looked up, her eyes filled with the storm of emotions she'd been trying to contain, he offered her a slight nod, a gesture of solidarity that had no need for words. It was enough to let her know he understood her pain, her doubts, her silent plea for something to cling to. Walking beside her as she moved back toward the small apartment she called home, Kenji kept pace without pressing her. He watched her shoulders slump under the weight of the day's turmoil, felt the tension in her steps, but he didn't rush her or demand her voice. Instead, he walked with her, sharing the burden in a way that made her feel less isolated. The rain continued to fall softly, washing over the streets like a cleansing ritual. The dark clouds mirrored her internal storm, but in the quiet companionship of his presence, there was a promise, perhaps fragile, but real, that she didn't have to face it all alone. As they reached her door, Hannah hesitated for a moment, her hand on the doorknob. Kenji lingered, silently offering a reassuring look. It was in the simple act of standing firm, of being present without expectation, that his loyalty revealed itself, not as a grand gesture, but as a steady thread woven into the fabric of her uncertainty. She looked at him then, and for a fleeting moment, she saw not just a boy from her neighborhood but a quiet anchor in the swirling tempest of her life. His loyalty was not born of heroism but of genuine, human steadiness, an unspoken promise that, whatever storms might come, she would not face them alone. The rain's rhythmic patter grew softer as she unlocked the door, stepping inside with a faint, trembling breath. Kenji remained outside for a moment longer, watching her silhouette fade into the shadows of her small world. His presence was a quiet testament to the power of loyalty, an anchor amid the chaos, a reminder that even in the fiercest storms, consistency and patience could carve out a space for hope. And as the rain continued to fall, washing away the dust of rumors and fears, the night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the dawn. In that stillness, Hannah felt a faint flicker, an ember of resilience sparked by the simple, enduring act of standing firm alongside someone who believed in her quietly, unwaveringly. The storm outside might have been relentless, but within her, a new strength was beginning to take root, nurtured in the silent support that, like the dawn, promised the possibility of renewal. Hannah's days began to shift subtly, like the slow unfurling of dawn after a long, restless night. The heavy weight of societal judgment and family expectations still lingered, but beneath it, a quiet resilience started to take root. She found herself waking up with a different intention, not to hide from the world, but to reconnect with herself. The small poetry book Kenji had given her sat on her bedside table, its worn pages whispering stories of storms passing and new beginnings. She would read a line or two each morning, letting the words seep into her consciousness, reminding her that her worth was not dictated by others' opinions. One afternoon, she wandered into the local park, walking slowly along the winding paths that she had once hurried past without noticing. The air was thick with the scent of rain and blooming flowers, a gentle reminder of nature's patience and persistence. As she sat on a worn wooden bench, she realized that her smile was creeping back, tentative at first, but genuine. It was a small, almost imperceptible shift, yet it felt like a seed planted deep within her, quietly awaiting nourishment. In the days that followed, Hannah began to create again, sketching in her journal, trying her hand at writing poetry, and even helping her mother in small ways around the house. She found solace in the act of making something with her own hands, no matter how imperfect it might be. Slowly, she was learning that her worth was rooted in her own efforts, her own passions, not in the validation or approval of a world that seemed so eager to judge her. It was a slow, deliberate awakening, a delicate dance of rediscovery that didn't demand perfection but celebrated progress. She started to teach herself to listen, not just to others, but to that quiet voice inside that had been silenced by fear and doubt for so long. When she encountered the community's gossip and judgment, she no longer let it drown her. Instead, she observed her own reactions, recognizing that her strength lay in her ability to remain anchored amid turbulence. The storm outside still raged, but within her, a calm began to grow, a knowing that she could weather storms, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Her interactions with others grew more genuine. She sought out conversations not for validation but for understanding. She found joy in sharing her ideas quietly, in encouraging her classmates to express themselves, in inspiring those around her through her renewed sense of purpose. She understood, in her own quiet way, that her journey was about cultivating resilience from within, building a foundation that no external upheaval could shake. And yet, she remained mindful that her transformation wasn't about overcoming others but about embracing herself. Her worth was no longer a fragile thing to be handed or taken away. It was a light that flickered and grew brighter with each small act of kindness, each moment of courage. Her smile, once guarded and fleeting, now blossomed more freely, like the first delicate bloom after a long winter. Her dreams, once buried beneath layers of doubt, began to surface again, shimmering softly like stars in a clear night sky. In this quiet renewal, Hannah understood that her purpose was something she carried inside her, an unbreakable core built from her own hopes, her own struggles, her own resilience. She no longer needed to wait for rescue or validation. She was becoming her own source of strength. And as she looked toward the horizon, she saw the faint promise of a dawn, gentle yet persistent, whispering that even after the fiercest storms, new light always finds a way to emerge. Her journey was far from over, but she had begun to walk it with open eyes and an open heart. The storm outside still threatened, but inside her, a quiet revolution was taking hold, a reminder that true worth is cultivated from within, like a garden that blooms brightest when tended with patience, love, and unwavering belief in oneself. And in that gentle awakening, Hannah found not just healing, but the courage to dream again, knowing that her story was hers to write, one deliberate step at a time. The town square was alive with the hum of anticipation, a gentle buzz that grew louder as the sun dipped below the horizon. Hannah stood at the edge of the small stage, her hands trembling slightly, clutching a piece of paper she had written the night before. The crowd, neighbors, friends, family, even distant relatives, had gathered, drawn by whispers of change, of someone daring to speak their truth in a place where silence often reigned. It was more than a community event, it was a moment of reckoning, a testament to the quiet strength Hannah had cultivated over these past weeks. As she took a tentative step forward, her eyes caught Kenji's in the crowd, a steady, reassuring presence. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill her lungs, grounding her amidst the rising tide of nerves. The faint rustling of leaves and the distant murmur of voices blurred into a moment of stillness. Then she began. Her voice was soft at first, almost fragile, but each word gained strength as she spoke of her journey, not of rebellion, but of rediscovery. She told of the storms she'd weathered, the fears that had threatened to drown her, and the small, flickering light that had guided her back to herself. Her words wove through the crowd like a gentle ripple, touching hearts in ways she hadn't anticipated. She spoke of her family's expectations, the judgments cast by her community, and her own struggle to find worth beyond appearances and titles. But she also shared her awakening, the realization that her purpose was not dictated by others, but cultivated from within, nurtured by her passions, her fears, and her unwavering hope for a better tomorrow. As she spoke, her voice grew steadier, clearer. The crowd listened, not as outsiders judging her, but as witnesses to her courage. Some nodded softly, others exchanged glances of understanding. She saw Kenji leaning slightly forward, a quiet nod of support, and that small gesture rooted her even more firmly in her resolve. When she finished, silence lingered for a heartbeat before erupting into applause. Not the polite claps of obligation, but genuine, heartfelt recognition. Tears welled in her eyes, and she allowed herself a small, trembling smile. For the first time, she felt the full weight of her own strength, no longer hidden behind fear or shame, but shining openly like the last rays of sunset streaking across the sky. She stepped down from the stage, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and newfound purpose. The community gathered around her, some placing gentle hands on her shoulders, others simply standing close, offering silent support. Her words had become a bridge, connecting her past fears with her emerging future, transforming her internal storm into a shared moment of understanding. This was her truth, spoken aloud, not in defiance but in acceptance. The wind carried her voice, a whisper of resilience, across the gathered crowd. The sky above the town was painted in hues of gold and violet, a poetic reminder that even after nights of darkness, dawn was inevitable. Hannah looked up, feeling the warmth of the fading sun and the collective strength of her community. She knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, but this moment, this act of vulnerability and bravery, had planted a seed of hope that would continue to grow. Her story was no longer confined within the walls of her own heart. It had become a shared narrative of courage, of breaking free from chains of doubt and fear. She had faced her greatest fear, standing before others, bare and honest, and had emerged not just unscathed, but renewed. As she stepped back into the crowd, the sky deepening into twilight, Hannah realized that her worth was no longer something to be hidden or protected. It was a beacon, shining brighter with each act of honesty and love. And as the community watched her, a new chapter began, not in silence, but in the collective harmony of acceptance and hope, whispering that the greatest transformation comes when we dare to speak our truth in the face of fear. In the quiet aftermath of Hannah's speech, the family's home felt heavier than usual, filled with unspoken words and lingering shadows of disappointment. Her father, Mr. Takashi, stood near the window, gazing out at the distant horizon, his face etched with lines of concern and regret. It had been a long day, and his heart wrestled with the weight of his own stubbornness, his rigid expectations, and the silent pain of watching his daughter struggle under the weight of societal judgment. As Hannah moved to the corner of the living room, her eyes flicked toward him, a mixture of vulnerability and hope shimmering in her gaze. She had spoken her truth in front of the town, but now, she yearned for a moment of genuine connection, one that could bridge the chasm that had grown between them. Slowly, her father turned, his footsteps hesitant yet purposeful. His eyes searched hers, and in that silent exchange she saw the flicker of a man who was beginning to understand, perhaps too late, but sincerely. He took a step closer, voice trembling as he finally broke the silence. "Hannah," he began softly, "I was wrong. I saw only what I wanted to see, your future as I envisioned it, not the one you needed to find for yourself." His words felt like fragile glass, vulnerable and tremulous, yet honest. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, and she nodded, not trusting her voice to carry the weight of her feelings. Her father's gaze softened, and he moved closer, reaching out to gently hold her hands, warm, trembling, alive with unspoken remorse. "I thought I was protecting you," he continued, "but I see now that I was only building walls around us, walls that kept both of us from truly understanding each other." Hannah's breath caught in her throat as she felt the truth of his words seep into her very bones. For so long, she had believed love and acceptance from her family were conditional, earned only if she conformed, if she hid her fears behind a mask of perfection. But in this quiet, honest moment, she realized that love, true love, was patient and forgiving, willing to admit mistakes and grow anew. Her father's voice cracked as he added, I see now that you are more than the daughter of a CEO or the heir to a legacy. You are your own person, with hopes and fears that deserve to be acknowledged. I'm sorry I failed to see that sooner. The words poured out, unfiltered and raw, as if releasing years of repressed regret. Hannah felt her heart soften and swell with a mixture of relief and forgiveness. She stepped closer, her voice trembling but steady. Daddy, I've needed you to listen, not to judge, but to understand. I've learned that vulnerability is not weakness, it's the start of something real. As she spoke, her father's eyes shimmered with tears, tears of regret, of love, of redemption. He brushed a hand over her hair gently, a silent apology and an unspoken promise to do better. In that moment, the distance that once separated them dissolved into a fragile, yet resilient bond. The house seemed to breathe again as the two shared this honest reconciliation, an imperfectly beautiful truth that had finally broken through the walls of misunderstanding. Outside, the last light of day faded into a gentle dusk, and the sky painted itself with streaks of gold and violet, metaphors for hope and renewal. Their journey was far from over, but what mattered now was that they had begun to walk the path toward understanding and forgiveness. The night stretched before them, quiet and full of possibility, as they sat together in the soft glow of the evening, knowing that love's greatest power lies in acknowledging our faults and choosing to heal. And beneath the vast, star-studded sky, they listened to the gentle whisper of the wind, inviting them to step forward into a future where acceptance blooms freely, like flowers opening slowly at dawn, resilient and radiant, ready to embrace whatever comes next. As the night settled softly over the town, a gentle hush fell like a velvet blanket, wrapping everything in quiet reflection. Hannah sat on the porch, her eyes tracing the delicate patterns of the stars stretching across the darkened sky. The world was still, yet within her, a quiet symphony of hope played, a melody born from vulnerability, courage, and the understanding that love is not a grand miracle but a simple act of showing up, again and again, in the small moments where we dare to be honest. The stars shimmered above, each one a tiny beacon of distant light, reminding her that even in the deepest darkness, there is beauty, and that no one is truly alone when they carry their truth openly. The night air carried the faint hum of crickets, a lullaby composed by nature herself, whispering that life continues, resilient and persistent, much like the human spirit. Hannah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the cool breath of the wind against her skin, and realized that her journey was only beginning. The sky's vastness was a mirror to her own heart, expansive, mysterious, filled with infinite possibilities. The dawn would come, she knew, bringing new light, new chances to grow, to love, and to connect. And in that quiet, luminous space between night and morning, she understood that the true magic was never in changing others but in discovering that love's greatest power lies in the simple act of being present, of listening without judgment, of offering kindness that echoes beyond words. It's in the silent understanding that we are all fragile, imperfect, yet beautifully resilient, each of us carrying a universe within. As she looked up at the heavens, her heart felt a gentle warmth, like the first rays of sunrise peeking over the horizon, promising a new beginning. The sky gradually shifted from ink black to shades of amber and rose, a poetic reminder that even the darkest nights give way to light. And just as the stars fade with the dawn, so too do our fears and doubts dissolve when met with compassion and courage. Hannah's story had shown her that love is not a magical salvation but a testament to our shared humanity, that no one truly walks alone when we choose to open our hearts, to listen, and to accept. In that moment of quiet reverence, she felt a profound connection to everything around her, the gentle rustling of leaves, the distant call of a nightingale, the silent promise of a new day waiting to unfold. She breathed deeply, feeling the weight of her past lift, replaced by a gentle hope that shimmered like the first light of morning. And as her eyes drifted from the star-studded sky to the horizon's edge, she understood that her story, like the dawn, was a continuous cycle of darkness and light, a reminder that love is an act of faith, a shared journey that begins anew each day. So let us remember, in our own lives, that no matter how silent the night may seem, there is always a promise of dawn. That love, in its simplest form, is never truly gone, it's always waiting, like the sunrise after a long, quiet night. If this story has touched your heart, consider sharing it with others, subscribing to keep stories alive, and spreading the message that we are never truly alone when we carry love within us. Because in the end, love is the light that guides us home, through every darkness and into every new beginning.